In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Brother Nicholas noted to me about the Kentuckian that you can even say a sermon just based on it. So I'm not based the sermon only on the Kentuckian because I really wanted to tell you something else. But this perfectly meshes with what I was going to say. So the Kentuckian says, Christ, the joy of all, the truth, the light, the life, the resurrection of the world, hath of his goodness appeared to those on earth and become the archetype of the resurrection, granting divine forgiveness unto all. And in the epistle of the Apostle Paul to the Hebrews, he says, Wherefore we, receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. And Paul is very good about these things. He says something and then he gives you the application. So many times. So be careful when you read St. Paul, when he's really complicated, or when he says a bunch of things, then he's going to give you the application. So look for the application. So the story of Lazarus, of course, is very dear to us. One of my friend boys, Owen, is always asking me to tell the story of Lazarus. And we actually have fun with it because he doesn't want to tell it himself. He wants me to tell it. So I'll say like Mary and Brunhilde, and he'll correct me or something. Or I'll say that Martha, Mary met him and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have died. She says, no. He says, no, it's Martha. So he knows the story perfectly, but he wants me to tell it. So there's something to be said there about taking care of a child. I think by giving them attention, you're showing them love. So it's really giving him attention. And he doesn't want to tell the story himself. He's perfectly capable. He wants me to tell the story. So that's a little rabbit trail. But it's a very sweet rabbit trail for me because I tell the story all throughout the year. I've told it 500 times at least. So I still always get the names mixed up. I don't understand that. So the application of the truth is more important than the truth. You can believe the truth. The devil believes the truth. But he doesn't follow. So, of course, the truth is paramount. Without the truth, without God, there is no truth. So we must believe what is true about God. But if we believe but we don't act, it's as if we don't believe. So one of the things that always goes through my mind during this Holy Week that we're really in right now, I don't consider Holy Week to begin on Monday. To me, it begins today. And when we're in the midst of this Holy Week, we see the reactions of people to Christ. Adulation, worship, and then the crowd is turned. Now, some scholars say that it's a different crowd. And that might be. But that the Jews sort of handpicked people that would say, we have no other king but Caesar, that sort of thing. But probably there was some mix. And certainly the people that had worshipped God as Hosanna in the highest, they weren't going with sticks and clubs to protect him or anything else because they were afraid of the Romans. So there must be application to everything that we learn. And here we are celebrating Christ is the archetype of the resurrection. He is coming into town in a few days, tomorrow for us, a few days after he raised Lazarus, as a king. Of course, he's riding on a donkey, humbly, not on a horse, on a donkey. But he's coming in as a king, and he's being worshipped as God, as he's coming into town. Now, if we're going to worship Jesus Christ as God, then it stands to reason that we should follow the things that he says. Since he says, how can you say you love me, and you do not do the things that I tell you to do? So, we must apply our knowledge of who God is to the way we live. And St. Paul is doing that here. I was wondering, why would this particular reading be for Lazarus Saturday? There's tons of readings in the epistles that are about the resurrection. There's plenty of them. They could be put in because, after all, today we are celebrating by anticipation the resurrection. But we are instead reading something about the application of believing in the one who is resurrected. So let's look at with a little bit of detail at this particular reading. The things that he says, I think, are not particularly as important as that we know that there are things that are to be said about believing in God. There's a lot more than just what he said here. You can look at the epistles for all that. You can look at the Gospels for all that, where all of it is binding to us. But there must be a sense in us that if we believe something, we act upon it. This is why the church is so weak. This is why when you read history, you see about even Christians killing Christians, like St. Maximus the Great being tortured by those who purported to be Christians. Or Maximus the Confessor, excuse me. He was great, of course, too. And there's other examples. And there's so many examples of hierarchs that became heresiarchs. And so much else throughout church history. We have it happening now in current history where that's happening. And this is because there's not an application of who Christ is to their lives. Because if you believe in God as God, then you shouldn't be doing things that are so ungodly. I understand we have weakness in sin, but I'm talking about the terrible capriciousness of man that we see coming up in Holy Week now, and we see today. Capriciousness of man, even among some of our hierarchy, unfortunately. So let's look at this. Wherefore, we are receiving a kingdom. When Christ was coming in, they should have thought they were receiving a kingdom. God is coming in to be worshipped, to reveal himself as he is. Because we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace. What an interesting term. I'd be interested in knowing what the actual Greek is, or have it explained to me, because just knowing the Greek words wouldn't help me. But what the actual idiom is. Let us have grace. So God is giving us grace. Let us accept it. How do you accept God's grace? You accept God's grace by becoming like him. He's giving you grace, that is himself, to become like him. So if we have grace, we are becoming like him. Otherwise, we just maybe are fortunate about something. Maybe we were cured of a disease, or maybe something happened that was fortuitous for us, that God arranged, or anything else, or we learned something beautiful. But if we don't take that grace and bring it into our heart, then we don't have grace. What a terrible thing to not have grace when grace is all about around us, since God is all around us and within us. So he says, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. One of the things that my father taught me, now he wasn't particularly a Christian, he believed in the man upstairs, but I'm indebted to him that he really taught me this. He taught me how to be a man. And one of the major aspects of being a man is that as a man you have responsibilities. You have responsibilities as a man. There are things that you must do because of who you are. He inculcated that in my heart. And then I became a Christian, and I understood where the source of that energy is to do the right things. God living within our heart. So if God is within our heart, we are obligated. And this is not an obligation such as an overseer holding a whip and telling us, do this or else you will be punished. This is an obligation from the heart, because God has appeared to us, because we are receiving the kingdom. So because of this obligation, we will serve God acceptably, with reverence and with godly fear. And he has a few details. Well, he says God is a consuming fire. Can you imagine the people in Jerusalem? They're seeing God come into town on a donkey, and he just looks like a poor traveling creature. But he's a consuming fire. How many thought of him as a consuming fire right then? Probably really none. Even, perhaps, probably the Theotokos. But nobody else. because they all ran away and were frightened. And even John was frightened, although he didn't run away, when he was crucified. So if we think of him as a consuming fire, we'd want to be near that fire. And we would fear the fire, but also we would revere the fire. So God is a consuming fire. We believe these things about God. When we say these things about God, we're speaking of the consuming fire. When we partake of the holy mysteries, we're partaking of consuming fire. When we say our prayers and say, Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us. No matter how fast we say it, or no matter how much we slur the words, or how much or how little attention we pay, we are praying to a consuming fire. Let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them. Them that suffer adversity, as being yourselves also in the body. So we have the golden rule, right? The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So you measure what you would want, you would think another person would want. Well, here it's sort of like a turned on its head golden rule. You would feel what's in the sufferings of those in another body as if it's your own body. What an idea for Christians to feel suffering that much. I'm going to go off a little rabbit trail. I was talking with Father Raphael yesterday, and there's something very terribly sad. Terribly sad. And he said his son had to finish his retirement from New York City Police Department. And so he had to go there. They were actually paying him, it's called terminal leave. It's kind of a weird sound, but terminal leave. He's still alive at the end of it, thankfully. And he had to go to his precinct and turn in his weapon and his equipment and stuff like that as a now retired officer. And his precinct happened to be, I believe, in Harlem. And Father Raphael told me that just recently they had discovered a homeless man was dead. Well, that happens a lot. Homeless man was dead for 2 weeks and no one noticed. He was just sitting there. I'm not sure where, probably in the midst of garbage or whatever. People passing by, not noticing that this man was not moving. They just thought he was sleeping. 2 weeks. Of course, by then, he would stink. Not be at all like Lazarus and rise from the dead. What a terrible thing. A human being, separated soul from body, no one noticed. No one cared. Not for 2 weeks. And then, of course, when he was discovered, I'm sure he was just kind of put in a body bag and, shunted off and probably cremated. What a terrible thing. What terrible things happen to humanity. We should feel the pain of that in our hearts, shouldn't we? That kind of thing happens. Happens all the time. Homeless people dying alone. Of course, we have wars, always, all over the world. We have mistreatment of people, torture, and beating of children, women. Terrible things. Terrible things. We should feel that in our heart, as if it's our own body, as if that homeless man is our own brother or father. But we don't really, do we? Maybe for a moment we do. But for the most part, we just go on with life. It's a terrible tragedy that man died totally alone. Totally alone. Without anybody to care. So we should, as Christians, be a light to everyone. And feel the needs of everyone. Because Christ has manifested himself. Of course, we know now the rest of the story. They only saw him going into Jerusalem on that day. We know, of course, that he was crucified, he rose from the dead, he sent us the Holy Spirit, he's commissioned his apostles to be the princes of the church, and all these things. We know all these things now. So now, with all that knowledge, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to live? We have to serve God acceptably and with reverence and with godly fear, or else we're not living at all. We're dead. Even if we speak of life, we're dead. So, for me, Lazarus Saturday of course, has always been, it's a harbinger of the resurrection. The Kentuckian says that. But it's also this commentary on human affairs. Probably the most powerful commentary, the shortest and most powerful commentary on human affairs is 2 words. Jesus wept. They didn't understand why he was weeping. He was weeping not for Lazarus. He was about to raise him from the dead. He was weeping because there were all these people around who did not believe in him, or worse, they believed in him, but they subjugated that belief to their own agendas, their own false and evil agendas. And there were those who were saying evil things about him and were going to be involved in the plot to have him killed. And there were spies, of course, that were looking to see what Jesus would do. And they didn't see the resurrection of Lazarus as a great miracle. They saw it as evidence that they really needed to hasten their attempt to get rid of him. Now the people saw it as a great miracle. That's why the populace changed. It's more often than in a presidential election. You see all these swings between what people think. Well, so many people thought Christ was evil, or at least they were not sure about him. There were a lot of people that did think that he was good and God and a prophet, etc. But then look, the whole populace just about, except for a few Pharisees and a few Sadducees and a few elites, they welcomed him as God. But it was an ephemeral thing. It was an ephemeral, changeable thing, because they were not receiving him as receiving a king and giving his kingdom to us. They were receiving him with sort of this flash happiness and this exaltation. Well, that's not what Christians should feel. Happiness is fine if, you see somebody on the Rangers hit a home run, right, Ezra? Especially if it's Corey Seager, right? Happiness is fine if things happen in life. That's great. But what you need is the Christian joy that God has given you his kingdom, and you're receiving his kingdom, and there are things that are incumbent upon you because of receiving his kingdom. We have responsibilities. We must live as Christians. We must care about the homeless person who died alone. We must care about the one in bonds. We must care about the one who's has troubles with their life. Depression or anxiety or drug use or bad relationships or whatever else it is. We must care about everyone because it's incumbent upon us, because God is giving us his kingdom, which means God is within our hearts. And if God is in our heart and we don't act as God, then he'll leave our hearts. So this is the story for me of Lazarus Saturday. That God is showing himself to be king, and only in a few days later will show himself to be mounted on a donkey, will be brought into Jerusalem as king and God and recognized as such. But if we recognize that we recognize, then he is giving us a kingdom, and we are incumbent as those who are of his kingdom to act like it. And too many people did not. And that's why Christ was crucified. Of course, he knew all that would happen. And in this day, too many people who are Orthodox Christians don't act like Orthodox Christians. They know things, but they don't. You guys have to stop. Hey, you guys have to stop. Oh, I see. It always points, all roads point to Rome. Yeah. It is incumbent upon us to act as Christians because God has given us himself. So let's do that as best we can. And as you go through Holy Week, I hope it'll be a cathartic experience for you. I hope that something will change in you. I hope something will turn in you in some way. I hope that you will feel something you've never felt before. And I'm not talking about emotionally. I'm talking about something that changes in your soul. May it be blessed. God bless you.